Well, guys, let's talk about passive crossovers. Hopefully, I don't bore you to death. The main thing is I'm going to make this as I'm gonna phrase it in such a way that I understand it. Hopefully, that'll be the same way you can understand it. We ain't gonna be doing no rocket surgery. We're gonna be using hammers and saws. All right, guys. So we're going to look at this little tiny crossover network, which is just a tweeter. That's all this is for, is a tweeter. But it does have attenuation. I cannot, attenuation. That's the word. Good grief. My brain is off. And what that means is it adds a resistor and cuts power to the tweeter. Uh, and all of these fancy ones, well, some of them have two or three positions, but it's all the same basic idea. So if you see over here, you got a positive coming in and a negative going in. You got a positive and negative coming out. Now on the back side, if we look at the negative right here, which is coming into this point, you follow it across, it comes out over here, negative out. So we don't have to worry about the negative route at all. It just goes straight through. Now, the positive wire, on the other hand, has a different job. So it comes in here first and hits the switch and decides whether or not it's going to be having extra resistance in it or not. Do you want it louder or do you want it quieter? If it chooses to have attenuation, in other words, the switch is set to the negative 2 dB position, then it'll follow this route. It'll go through this resistor. So here's your resistor leg, okay? So it's going to go this route, and instead of escaping to this board, it's going to go through the resistor, come out over here, and bam, now it's connected to the capacitor. The capacitor is basically a high pass filter, and most generally cuts the highs at a 6 dB roll off. Okay, we'll get to this more in a minute. So you're following the signal through the capacitor, and then it comes over here, and over here it can go through this coil. And you notice the coil is on the ground lead. All right, that's because the coil, it's getting grounded, but it's also going out. So if you pay attention to how this is hooked up, it doesn't have to go through the coil. It's not in series, but the coil is connected to the output stage going out at the same time. And then the coil is grounded on the other side. And what happens when you do this configuration, where you have the capacitor in line and the coil connected to the output of the capacitor and then grounded, is you get a 12 dB roll-off slope. So it's a much more decrease in, and it's quicker, it rolls the lows off much quicker. Now, interestingly enough, you could take this same board and turn this into a mid-range filter as well. And what you would do is take the coil and the capacitor and put them in series. So you'd have your speaker signal, your line signal, full range signal coming into one side of the capacitor, coming out the other side, going into one side of the coil, coming out of the coil. And then you would have a mid-range signal, because the coil when it's in series, it cuts your highs, or it cuts your highs. So this guy cuts lows, this guy cuts highs, and you're left with a little band pass, right? And let's keep going. Let's assume we're going to take these same components and make a filter for a little woofer. It would need to be small because these components won't handle much heat, but all you do then is run the coil by itself in series on the positive lead going to the woofer. Bam, you just cut your highs. So these two components, essentially, can do tweeters, can do mid-woofers, and can do mid-range. And this configuration, though, it's only good for a tweeter. The resistor is just for this switch. So you want to cut it a little more, cut it a little less. It's just adding resistance to the circuit. Now, that's how simple a crossover is. Now, believe me, there's a whole lot more stuff you can add to it to filter and smooth out and make it a little bit better. And spend more money. Essentially, that's what it is. Cost you more money. And there's a lot more you can add to do those things. However, these two components are really the only ones. Whenever you're going to filter a woofer, the coil is usually bigger than this. Most of the time, you'll see them on a crossover. They'll be turned sideways and be kind of long, like a little log. And that's designed more for a woofer. This would technically work, but it wouldn't last that long. The coil wire is too fine. It's just not designed for that much power. But the process is exactly the same. It also wouldn't be a good enough dampener, for the woofer has a lot more meat to get that dampening factor on the highs, to cut them highs back. But yeah, this is all you need, is these two guys right here. A little simple board. So you guys could easily go on to Amazon and order some coils and different, or you could make your coils yourself. Order some resistors and some capacitors. You could build crossover networks all day. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. Not really. What we were discussing is how much power a rig like this consumes from your speakers. So how much power do you lose coming from here to here, right? For a tweeter wire speaker. If you got a capacitor with a coil that's grounded on the leg of the capacitor, if you've got that set up to give you a 12 dB roll off, you're losing about 10%. So it's about 5% with 5%, I said 5 watts. 5% with just the capacitor, around 10% with both. And I mean, as you go up and more quickly dropping the, as your roll off gets steeper and steeper, you have a higher percentage of power loss in the circuit. Same thing with the other way around. Whenever you affect the roll off is nice and shallow, you're only losing a little bit of power in the circuit. But if you have a much harsher, quick roll off, you're losing a lot more efficiency in the circuit. And that goes for everything. So if you got a mid-range and it's got nice wide slope, it's consuming less power. If it's got a much tighter slope, it's consuming more. And that's because you've got more and more and more components involved in shaping that slope. So the more things you have in between this wire and this wire, the more power it consumes, and essentially the sharper the slope. Well, hopefully that helped out some of you out there that are like me and your brain don't work in trigonometry and calculus and algebra. You just want to understand the basics. The basics are simple. You know, you're going to give up a little bit of power when you use one of these things to control your frequencies, but for the most part, you're going to be powering mids and highs. Who cares if you give up a few watts? It's more about the control, the frequency that you're getting to your speaker. Nice, clean sound. You're not getting anything in there that you don't want. And you got a nice overlap so that you're not trying to play, not trying to play the same frequency with two different drivers. Everything's doing what it's supposed to do. That's what's up. If you guys found this informative and helpful, be sure and hit that little subscribe button. And more importantly than that, leave comments, because I feed off the comments. I'm telling you, it's like Little Shop of Horrors. Feed me, Seymour. Feed me all night long.